This is Professor Michael Chapman. I'm one of the most experienced IVF doctors in Australia. I believe that an important part that I can contribute is to educate patients in relation to fertility, infertility, and all that involves. These series of podcasts help to educate you. I hope they are helpful to you. If you wish to know more, however, I'm more than happy to have you contact me via email, which is profmchapman@gmail.com, or make an appointment to see me on 9138 4222.
Another question for you, Prof. What's your opinion on full rights for embryos, which in some cases means fertilized eggs created in the process of IVF and not implanted in a woman? Would they have the same legal rights as children? And should they?
It's a debatable question. The first step in that conversation is what I say to patients when they've got excess embryos and they don't know what to do with them, and are worried that they are potentially throwing away a potential child. In nature, we know from measuring hormone levels in women in the second half of their cycle, i.e. after they have ovulated and fertilization may have occurred. We know that in young women in the 30s, something like 60% of cycles reach a point where they're producing pregnancy hormones. In other words, there must have been fertilization, there must have been attachment to the uterus. But when it comes to the missed period, only 15% of those will actually be ongoing. So of the original 60%, we're down to 15. So it's 3/4 of all embryos created in nature don't create a pregnancy. So your embryos that you have, that you've had your 2 or 3 children, each one of those really only has a relatively small chance of actually being a baby in the long term. So to some extent that reassures them that information. But there are people who are attached to them. I mean, I've certainly had patients who wanted to and did come to the laboratory. We took the stores where we store them, gave them to them, and they took them and gave them a burial at their home, so as a tribute to them being part of the pathway. So that's that option is there. There's obviously an option of actually giving those embryos to a woman who doesn't make eggs and their partner doesn't have any sperm. So embryo donation is a possibility. My experience is that 99% of patients don't want to go down that route because they do see it as, if there is a child there, it's sort of like adopting out a child. However, for particular couples in particular situations, that's their only way, and I've certainly had very happy parents in that scenario as a result of people's generosity. I would say there's a lot of counselling that goes along with that, both together, what sort of relationship are we going to have with that child or not. There's a lot of talking to be done before we set out on that route. There are people who come to me and say, I only want to fertilise 3 eggs because I don't want to be in the situation of having excess embryos. Again, that's uncommon, but I've certainly had it, and we abide by their wishes. So, the next question that follows on that is, what about all these frozen eggs? Because the data is very convincing so far. It's been around for about a decade, but even those countries where egg freezing has been in place for more than a decade, the maximum, I think it's Spain, is up to about 20% of those women coming back. We saw some data at this meeting suggesting it was actually in Australia, it's less than 15% are actually coming back for their eggs that they froze in the possibility that they might need them later on. Now, that we haven't in Australia been doing this in any significant way more than about 5 years. So women in their early 30s are now not even 40. So once they hit 40 and above, we may see many more of these women come back for their eggs. But in the meantime, they found Mr. Right. They found a relationship, and these women aren't infertile women. They can get pregnant on their own. but it does provide a degree of backup. But if they do get pregnant on their own and they've got this bank of eggs that they're paying somewhere $250 or some clinics more a year, do they want to keep those eggs or not, or what do they do with them? And obviously, one thing we're short of in Australia in particular is donor eggs for women whose ovaries have run out of eggs. And I think there'll be some increasing pressure for women to consider that as an option rather than just throw them down the drain. So, yeah, we keep having in the IVF world, we keep having ethical dilemmas thrown up. It's part of what keeps us all very interested.
And don't forget that you can access all the previous episodes by going to our website, www.theivfjourney.com, and select IVF Journey Podcast from the navigation menu.